Hi everyone, I'm Beck, owner and head sports dietitian at Nutrient Nation. As promised, here is your welcome video on why you need to nail your nutrition for better sports performance. So we know that athletes have very different nutrient requirements compared to the general population who tend to be less active. So you have increased energy requirements because you're expending more energy across the day. You've got different macro and micronutrient requirements because we have specific sports nutrition targets that we need to be aiming for. You've got increased fluid and electrolyte requirements. So because you sweat more across the day and during training sessions, this increases your need to be replacing extra fluid and electrolytes. And then you have a need for strategically planning your meals and snacks. So not only across the day to suit your training, but also across your different training blocks. So looking at the differences in energy requirements between different individuals. So depending on the type of sport you play or exercise you do, your energy requirements are going to differ. So if you have longer duration, higher intensity, or more frequent sessions across the week, your requirements are going to be higher. Even you as an individual athlete are likely going to have different energy requirements from day to day, depending on the training load, but then also across your different training blocks. So often in the lead up to a particular event, you might have different training programs, and then your energy is likely to change across those different training blocks, depending on what the goals of those particular training blocks are. And then depending on whether your goal is to currently maintain weight, lose weight, gain weight, then this is going to alter your energy requirements as well. So if we just take a quick look at the differences in energy requirements that we can see between individual athletes. If we compare a 70 kilogram to 80 kilogram athlete, the difference in energy requirements is around 250 calories per day, or around 1,000 kilojoules. And most of this difference is made up of the additional weight, but particularly additional muscle mass in the heavier athlete. So again, it's really important to understand as you gain weight or lose weight, then again, your energy requirements are going to change. And then, of course, your energy requirements are going to be higher on days where you have more training. So athletes expend 500 to 1,000 calories, or even more for some athletes, per hour of exercise. So that's a lot of energy that needs to be replaced to ensure that you keep fueling and recovering from your trainings optimally. So looking at the carbohydrates and why these need to be focused on even more so for athletes. So just looking at carbohydrates for general health, then we know that carbohydrates are your fuel for energy across the day. So that's all activities, not just your exercise. Good quality carbohydrates provide key nutrients such as fiber, which is really good for gut health. So we can see that carbohydrates are an important part of your everyday diet. But then when we look at sports nutrition recommendations more specifically, carbohydrates are also your body's preferred source of energy during exercise. So if you have inadequate carbohydrate intake in the lead up, or during sessions, if you've got long sessions, then it's probably going to lead to poor athletic performance, and particularly during those high intensity sessions when the body uses a much higher rate of carbohydrate for fuel. As an athlete, you only have around up to 2 hours of stored glycogen. So glycogen is that storage form of carbohydrate. So again, if you're not pre-fueling or if you're not replacing carbohydrates during sessions, your energy beyond this 2 hour time point is going to decline. And if you're not recovering properly with carbohydrates, then your follow-up sessions are also going to be impacted. You also need to be more conscious of the timing of your carbohydrate intake to ensure adequate fueling and recovery, not just for that specific session, but for sessions day after day to ensure you get the most out of your training across your entire week. Now, looking at protein. So again, protein is an essential macronutrient for day-to-day health. So protein plays many roles in the body, not just muscle building and repair. So good quality protein foods also contain essential nutrients such as iron. So iron helps to transport oxygen around the body, which of course helps you to breathe easier. During exercise, muscle is damaged, and dietary protein is required to repair that damage. So again, once we get to more sport-specific requirements, protein is one of the nutrients that increases with your requirements because of that muscle damage that we see during exercise. And without adequate protein intake, you'll likely find it harder to gain or maintain muscle mass. And you're more likely to lose muscle mass if you're in an energy deficit. So as an athlete, again, the timing of your protein intake needs to be considered. So it's not just about total protein intake for the day, but your timing of intake across the day. Now, looking at your micronutrient requirements. So again, there's a couple of micronutrients that need to be prioritized a little bit more in athletes compared to the general population. So electrolytes, and in particular sodium, is a really important one because sodium losses are quite considerable when you're losing sweat during your exercise sessions. And then particularly if you're exercising and training in hot environments or really high intensity or long durations, then those losses are going to be much greater. Therefore, you need to be replacing more. You also have increased calcium and vitamin D requirements. So we do often see calcium deficiency in the athletic population, and often this is due to inadequate intake of calcium-rich foods. And often this is an intentional removal or restriction of these particular foods, and then that can lead to calcium deficiencies, and over time that leads to poor bone health. And then with our vitamin D requirements, particularly those sports or types of exercise that tend to be conducted inside rather than outside, so you're not getting as much sun exposure, then we see vitamin D deficiencies in those types of athletes as well. And then, of course, iron is a really, really important nutrient for athletes as well. So again, we see quite high rates of iron deficiency in athletes, but particularly in female athletes, in runners and endurance athletes, and also in those athletes that tend to be limiting or avoiding those iron-rich foods, which tend to come from our animal-based proteins. Then looking at your fluid requirements. So ensuring adequate hydration is probably one of the simplest yet underutilized strategies to prevent performance decline. But fluid losses vary substantially from person to person and also within the one person under different environmental conditions. Exercise performance is significantly impaired when 2% or more of body weight is lost. So if you can work out your individual fluid losses and how that changes depending on the environmental conditions or the training conditions, then you can really go a long way to improving and maintaining your athletic performance. And then looking at the structure and the timing of your meal. So it's a really good idea for you to know how to modify your intake to suit your day-to-day training, because what you eat does not need to or probably shouldn't be the same on a day-to-day basis. If your training is different from day to day, your nutrition should be different from day to day. The time of day of your training, your personal preference for food and fluids, and also food tolerance all need to be taken into consideration when planning your sports nutrition diet and your base diet. You'll often require periodized nutrition plans, one that are tailored to your mini blocks, so looking at your week and how that needs to differ from day to day, but then also looking at your larger training blocks, so potentially a month block and having 3 back-to-back month blocks in the lead up to an event. Your nutrition is going to need to differ for each of those month-long training blocks. And of course, as an athlete, you're likely going to need to be more organised than most people to ensure adequate nutrition across the week. Often athletes are busy not only with training, but also with work or school, family as well. And that can make it really, really hard to optimize your dietary intake and your nutrient intake if you're not well organised. So planning and preparing your meals and snacks ahead of time is a really, really important activity for athletes. So what is the likelihood that you have inadequate nutrition for your sports performance? So in a sample of endurance athletes, we've seen that close to 50% of athletes were classified as high risk of low energy availability, and another 30% at moderate risk. So that only leaves 20% of athletes who are not at risk of low energy availability. So in total, 80% of athletes have improvements that they can make with their nutrition to help with their health and athletic performance. We've also seen from research that up to 70% of male and female athletes have inadequate carbohydrate intake, and that's inadequate carbohydrate intake from both a health perspective and a sports performance perspective. And athletes also have a moderate to high prevalence of nutrient deficiencies, including vitamin B12, vitamin D, folate, magnesium, iron and zinc, as well as calcium, which was shown on a couple of slides back as well. So what are the consequences of inadequate nutrition? So if you are one of these athletes that does have a nutrient deficiency, that isn't consuming enough carbohydrate or energy across the day, what is that going to look like for your health and performance? So we know that there are consequences of inadequate energy and nutrient intake. The body needs energy not just for sport and exercise, but also for daily life. And that's to fuel bodily functions like breathing, blood flow, maintaining healthy bones, muscles and hormones, and keeping your heart beating. So if you are not eating enough food, enough energy, enough nutrients across the day, you're going to be compromising health, number one, but sports performance, number two. So we can see here from the batteries that you can see if your energy intake and your energy levels are quite low. So at the left-hand end of this image, we can see that that's associated with impaired growth and development and impaired sports performance. Yet if you're a fully fueled or well-fueled athlete on the far right end of this image, that's what's associated with optimal health and energy and performance and body composition. So if your goals are to have optimal health, to run faster, to lift heavier, to have a more ideal body composition for you as an individual, you need to be at the far right end of this image, and you need to be well fueled and well nourished with energy and nutrients. If you only eat enough to get you through your training, so you're only giving yourself enough energy to maximize your energy levels and your performance in your specific 2-hour long training session, you're not going to have enough energy left for the rest of the day. And this is then when you start to see impacts in other areas of your life. So what are the types of signs and symptoms that we see with low energy availability? So we have gastrointestinal symptoms. In females, we see impacts on menstrual function. We see poor bone health, metabolic and endocrine or hormonal impacts. We see stunts in growth and development. We see psychological impacts, cardiovascular and immunological. So what all of those health consequences then lead to are obvious signs and symptoms that you as an athlete can actually identify yourself. So on the right-hand side, we can see that this then leads to decreased endurance or performance during your sessions, increased injury and illness. So if you're someone who notices that you frequently get injured or ill, this could be a consequence of low energy availability. If you have a decreased training response, or during your training sessions you notice impaired judgment, decreased coordination and decreased concentration. Changes to your mood as well. So if you notice irritability, depression, anxiety, all of these can also be linked to low energy availability. And then decreased reaction time, muscle strength. So again, all of these are linked back to low energy availability. So we can see that there's quite a range of symptoms that are linked to low energy availability, and all of them are probably quite obvious to you as the athlete if you start paying attention to these. So this can help you identify when you need to be increasing your energy intake. So what can you actually do? So as a starting point, we always recommend that our athletes get their base diet right first. You will get far more benefit and you will see far more improvements from ensuring that you get your base diet right first and then adding the icing on the cake after that. And the icing is the sport-specific nutrition recommendations. So what is the base diet? So the base diet is the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. So this is our 5 food groups, and this is eating the 5 food groups in the recommended amounts. So the recommended number of serves per day, and then looking at what a standard serve actually is. So we can see that we've got age differences in the recommended serves, and then also recommendations for males and females as well. There is also an Australian Guide to Healthy Eating for children and adolescents. So if you fall into that category, make sure you go and have a look at the recommendations specific for your age group. So it's important to note though that for most athletes, this is a starting point, and that's why we call it your base diet. This is your foundation, and this is what we want you to get right first, because this ensures nutrient adequacy for good health, but also the key nutrients that you're going to need for your sports performance. Once you've met these recommendations, you can then start adding additional foods on top to meet your sport-specific recommendations. So typically the extra foods that need to be included for athletes come from our grains and our lean meat or meat alternative categories. So our grains are our good sources of carbohydrates, and our lean meat or meat alternative category is our key sources of our protein. And it's our carbohydrates and protein, firstly, that are the nutrients that you have increased requirements for as an athlete. Once you've then had some additional serves of those, you can then move to adding additional serves of the other food groups to meet all of those micronutrient requirements. And then it also leaves some room left over for you to have an allowance of our discretionary choices. So that's it from me today. I hope you have found this video worthwhile. What I'd like you to take home from this video are those key signs and symptoms of low energy availability. If you notice any of these red flags, then please reach out to us at Nutrient Nation. We can help you to optimize your nutrition for better health and sports performance.